Yes.
If you watch the recent video that I did on YouTube in Breach about C.S. Lewis's lesser-known books, The Screwtape Letters and The Great Divorce, they're on there. The Dresden Files, some of our guests have been on there. There's a ton of great options, and you can check that all out free of charge. And remember, audibletrial.com/paranormale, audibletrial.com/paranormale. So tonight's episode is going to be talking about skepticism and critical thinking. Which skeptics in our audience, and if my history has taught me anything, there probably is at least one or two, because I've known a lot of skeptics, they don't believe in any of this stuff, but they find it fascinating.
Oh, yeah, like me.
Case in point. But are probably scratching their heads at the moment, because it's pretty odd to listen to a believer like myself talk not just about skepticism, but how very important it is in paranormal research. But it's true. If you want to be a good researcher, you have to be able to evaluate evidence. And that sometimes means you have to be willing to admit it's not a ghost. Every investigator I know, myself included, has had cases where the demon that was haunting the family was mental illness that was treatable by medication. The demon that's haunting the family is the raccoons living under the floorboards. The two overexcited dogs, they get lonely every time their owner leaves the house for the day and wreck her house.
I just saw a thing. I was watching a History Channel, and they had on one of their Mysteries of the Museum. There was a case where it was the same kind of thing. These guys were being woken up in the middle of the night by these noises. They heard things banging around. It sounded like, classic poltergeist. A paranormal investigator came out, did some readings and things, stayed during the night, discovered that, in fact, it was the limestone bedrock that the house was on had some kind of odd phenomenon where the groundwater seeping up caused like a reaction, and it caused them to shift and bang against each other, the plates.
Which made all these weird noises they're hearing.
Yeah, and it was completely a natural phenomenon, an unusual one, but it was completely explainable.
Which is actually the first piece of advice I can give prospective investigators about applying this kind of thing to investigation, is you want to be as aware as possible of natural phenomenon that can appear supernatural. Yeah. Whenever possible, it's good to bring with you a medical doctor, a psychiatrist, electricians, even. Case in point, I had a house in Delaware, and this was in fact legitimately paranormal, but having an electrician with us helped us demonstrate that, where we have an EMF detector going off in this one specific spot. And so the priest goes over and he does a quick blessing prayer and throws a little holy water, and the readings stop. But later we had the electrician check things out in the area and underneath the area to verify that no, there was no wiring issue in that part of the house that would have explained those readings.
Yeah.
Even weird stuff happens all the time that can be explained.
Yeah. Sometimes it is just the house settling or whatever.
And this is also another really common one. It's a principle that my mentor Lou had that I have. If you don't see it, it didn't happen. Now, keep in mind, and this is especially important for clients, anyone who thinks they have a haunted house, who's listening in, that thinks I'm saying, think your client's crazy. I'm not. That's not what I mean. It's entirely possible to be completely sane and think you have a ghost when you don't.
Yeah. Well, and also it's just basic principle. Eliminate the obvious stuff first.
When you have something really weird happening, like there's some evidence, there's extremely low frequency sound, is a really interesting one. So
yeah. Mythbusters did an episode on that where they were testing.
Yeah, and the test didn't actually go that well, and I know why, and I'm going to get into why.
Oh, cool. There you go.
So sounds that are very low and well below human hearing range, extremely low frequencies, can have very weird effects on the body. They can cause acute feelings of paranoia, the feeling of being watched, the feeling that there's something in the house, the need to get out. This is usually caused, for example, by a drip of water hitting a pipe at a very slow rate, just a ping, ping, ping. and it's not enough for you to register it consciously, but in your subconscious mind, the vibrations it's causing in the house are having an effect.
Yeah.
Now, here's the thing. For this type of frequency to affect the body, it's got to be very severe, which is why it didn't work in the Mythbusters case.
Okay.
A little bit of this infrasound, as they call it, isn't going to produce those effects. That's why you can watch the Mythbusters episode. They couldn't produce the feelings of paranoia and things like that to the extent they expected. Here's why. Now, the reason why your body has those reactions, it's actually a defense mechanism. That sound, when you have this infrasound at that level, it's causing your organs to liquefy. Your body is telling you to get out because whether it's not consciously aware of the sound, it's subconsciously aware of this problem that's causing massive organ damage and need to leave.
It's not good for you.
So, yes, skeptics are right. Infrasound can explain a few haunted cases, but there's going to be other medical problems very quickly if somebody's living in a house with this kind of sound. It's not just going to be, once in a blue moon there's this ping. It's not going to be like the Mythbusters episode, with all due respect to the Mythbusters.
Yeah. Well, they're not perfect. They've had to go back and revisit some of
And
their
which is one of the biggest reasons I
experiments.
like them is that, I mean, they're off the air now, although there's the new series.
The new team, yeah.
But they've always been, we get it wrong, and they go back and they try it again and see what happens.
Well, they're
which is good science.
Yeah, they're genuine.
Yeah.
Which is cool.
Which is something else we'll be getting into is the nature of scientific study, double blinds, peer review, and things like that, which we'll get into. The other half of this, aside from the importance of it in paranormal investigation, which is I want to talk about the alternative medicine community and how much nonsense there, sometimes very dangerous nonsense there is in that. People are dying because of some of the myths that are being told about vaccination and homeopathic remedies and vitamin B17 laetrile. But we'll get to that in a minute. There's a progression to the discussion. So I want to go over some of the basic principles of logic and critical thinking that come into play here. One of the most basic of which is known as parsimony or Occam's razor. Do you know that one?
I know the kind of what you would consider the everybody's idea
go
of
ahead.
it, but I don't know the
Give
exact
us
definition.
everybody what the idea of it.
The idea being that the simplest explanation is usually the best.
That's
Occam's razor.
Yes, that's
Yeah.
Occam's razor, also known as parsimony. It's the same
Right,
principle.
but I know that's not the actual thing, the rule that he came
It
up
is
with. It's
actually generally true.
oh, okay.
But it's the actual
it's
statement
the paraphrased version.
originally is that if all else is equal, the explanation that requires the fewest assumptions is usually correct.
Right. Which
What-
that sounds
yeah.
much better.
What this is really getting into is if you have something where, and it happens all the time, I'll give you a perfect example of Occam's razor in the paranormal community, which is the orb phenomenon. Now, if you don't know what orbs are, you can hop on Google and Google paranormal orb and find thousands of examples. They are, broadly speaking, pictures of light that appear on film that are supposedly spirits, or sometimes weirder things. I've even heard supposedly they're aliens. Now, the believers in orbs, that's what they say. Now, anyone with any background of photography will tell you, if you photograph dust, pollen, bugs, rain, snow, spittle from your mouth, or any one of 100 other naturally occurring particulates, it'll look like these little circles of light that appear on film.
Yeah.
One common mistake people make is that the dust has to be on the lens. No, it doesn't. In the air, you'll still get a photograph of it.
Especially if it's closer to the lens
Yeah.
than you are, it'll look bigger.
Exactly. You can even get them on video. And they're completely... Now, there's a whole school of thought that, well, some of them are dust, some of them are paranormal. How do you know? Now, if you apply... Now, let's talk about Occam's razor to tie this together. Now, we have two things. We have the possibility... If we take out all the other evidence, either they're dust or they're spirits. Now, if it's dust, all we have to assume is that dust exists. We know dust exists. The dust can be photographed. even the believers in orbs aren't denying that. And that dust, when it's photographed, can look like this. All of which we know to be true. For orbs to be spirits, you have to assume that spirits exist. And while certainly in the paranormal community, most people in the paranormal community believe spirits exist, if you're trying to convince a skeptic, you lost them on the first assumption.
Yeah.
You have to assume that if spirits exist, they could be photographed, and if they could be photographed, that they're going to appear in this form.
Well, and as the other saying goes, extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof.
I hate that sentence. It's factually not true. And in fact, in my opinion, it's usually an excuse to do what's called moving the goalposts, which is a common logical fallacy used by both sides in the paranormal debate, which is, okay, now this is met, or there have been studies of remote viewing and other psychic phenomenon that even many skeptics admit have met all ordinary requirements of evidence. But then they pull out that card and go, well, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, so it's still not enough. And it's well, one, who defines what's an extraordinary claim, and two, who defines what's extraordinary evidence?
Well, I think what I meant by it, and what I think is generally meant. Now, granted, you can pull out straw man arguments and change things, but what I mean is,
and we're going to get to what straw man arguments and moving the goalposts.
But if somebody's going to come to you with a photograph and say this is a spirit, and you go, well, that could be a spirit or that could be dust, and they say, well, it's a spirit. Well, okay, there needs to be you should, if you're going to say this is a spirit, you need to be able to claim, or you need to be able to find some way to prove that this is not just dust, and that it is in fact a spirit. Just if you've got two things like you said, the one that is the most obvious answer for it is
not
probably
always,
the truth.
but it's
not
usually
always
true. And I'll give you, I'll get to.
I mean, you might get
an example
actual,
where that isn't the case.
You might get an actual photograph of a ghost by accident, but unless you can prove it, it's not going to convince anybody.
I'll say there's a few exceptional cases of orb photographs I've seen that dust doesn't work.
Okay.
There's one a friend of mine took with time release, and when we have Joe on the show, I'll see if he can show it to us. With these lights, this more of a arc of light coming off of a series of candles, but which the obvious explanation would be that it's just the flame through time release, except they weren't lit.
Oh.
And he's shown it to actual photography professors and things like that, and they haven't been able to find an explanation for it. Okay, you kind of have something.
To me, that fulfills the requirement of extraordinary proof. You have something that can't be easily explained to back up your rather unusual claim.
There's also the Entity case, which the movie was famously made of. There's photographs from that case, and you can find those online as well, that were so good that they were the only ghost photographs ever published in popular photography, because popular photography couldn't explain what was going on.
See, that's another important thing of skepticism is there's a difference between being skeptical and being just flat
pig-headed.
Pig-headed or blind. Like when you get to a point where if you can admit to yourself that there's no evidence on earth that would convince you of something, then
you're as much a believer as
your mind is closed to the possibility, and that's not right either. You have to maintain a healthy skepticism,
absolutely,
where you're willing to be convinced if sufficient evidence is brought forward. That's usually where I try to live. I mean, there are things that I believe in, there are things that I kind of take for granted, but in a lot of cases, if someone can come to me and say, no, this is demonstrably not true, I will change my opinion and change my belief, because I want to live in a world where things that are true, and regardless of.
And I think all of us have that. I mean, I believe because of we have that ideal, we don't necessarily live up to it very well.
Some people want to believe they want to live in a world where everything they think is true is just true regardless.
And that's an important part of this discussion of skepticism is we want to live in the world that is, especially if you want to be an investigator and you want to present yourself as a credible person to the larger community outside of the paranormal, you need to use these kinds of skills. Most of the other big example we want to get to, but let me get in, before I get to that, I'm going to touch on it real quick and then go into this other thing and then come back. Because I do want to give that example where Occam's razor doesn't fit. Is the concept of of logical fallacies. Logical fallacies, less often, although they can come up when you're dealing with a claim, they more often come up when you're talking to somebody else about that claim, and they're things you want to avoid. But before we do that, I want to talk about mermaids. Because now, mermaids is a really good example of when Occam's razor doesn't work. And here's why. Now, most people, when they were kids, I'm sure you, Brian, and Beth have had the experience that you were told that mermaids were manatees. Have you ever heard?
Yeah, not when I was a kid. Actually, much later, I heard that's where they think the original stories of them came from.
That was a common rumor that they often spread.
Yes. But, and in one particular case, it's probably true. Because in the 1490s, 1500, I don't remember what, it wasn't his first voyage, but during one of his voyages to the New World, Columbus encountered what he described as mermaids. Now, there's a couple critical things that make us think these were manatees. One has happened off the coast of Hispaniola, what would eventually be known as Haiti. We don't have Columbus's records, unfortunately. The record actually comes from his navigator. But he describes them as being very large and looking more masculine than he expected. You know, manatees are huge. If you've never seen one, they're gigantic creatures.
They're also known as the sea cow.
Yeah.
For a reason.
And they have whiskers. Males and females both have whiskers. So he's probably describing a manatee. And here's the critical thing. Manatees are native to Caribbean waters. On the other hand, if you look at the oldest mermaid folklore, you find it mostly in the North Atlantic, among the Viking people, or in the Mediterranean and among the Middle Eastern cultures. Manatees, dugongs, and all of the related and there's one or two more related species that have gone extinct now, are not native to those waters. You would not see a manatee in the North Atlantic. There was one recently that got loose somehow and wound up in a river near here, like somewhere in northern U.S., not in Florida, weirdly enough, but that was a fluke. They're not native to these waters.
Yeah.
So
I always kind of wondered how you'd look at a manatee and get half woman, half fish out of that anyway.
Months at sea.
Those are some...
Probably
scary.
low on fresh water and food.
Yeah.
You haven't seen a woman in months. That's probably why Columbus thought they were mermaids.
Well, Columbus doesn't exactly have a sterling record with,
good Lord, no.
with critical thinking and the truth.
He doesn't have a sterling record on anything.
This is the guy who landed in the Caribbean and thought he was in India.
Thought till his dying day he had landed in India, no less.
Yeah, exactly. And the world was pear-shaped.
At some point, we'll have to go into some of the misconceptions about history, and there's a lot we can get in. Anyone who's interested in the short term, I suggest the TV show Adam Ruins Everything.
Yeah, or Animated History.
Or Reanimated History, which is an offshoot. So good. And he talks a lot about mistakes people make about Columbus and a whole bunch of other historical things.
He's very entertaining while doing so.
But, so there's another theory that's been proposed that explains... Now, so mermaids are clearly not manatees. Does this mean that they're actually half fish, half humans swimming out there in the ocean? Well, I'm very skeptical. I mean, maybe there's a type of fae of that sort, but on the whole, I don't really think that it's real likely that there are physical creatures meeting this description. But there's another explanation that better fits the facts.
Dolphins?
Yeah, dolphins plus a little bit more, actually. So what they've noticed is that if you're very close to the surface of the water, for example... They've noticed this on the Great Lakes from people standing on the shore. Another time that this would come up is if you're on a boat where the deck is below the actual sea level. For example, Viking longship. Vikings were one of the people that first saw manatees. So if you're in this position and a storm's brewing, things in the water, dolphins, whales, even driftwood, get... subject to an optical illusion that can make them look human-like. And this, all of a sudden, part of the dolphin looks female, and you see the dolphin's tail, and you get the half human, half
Well, and at least the dolphins
fish.
are a little bit slimmer. They have a little more if you saw them from a distance.
Yeah.
And they make noises that, if distorted, could sound like laughter or...
Well, here's another thing.
Almost human-like. Here's
another way that this explanation better fits the facts. Or, more accurately, the myth. According to myth, if you hear a mermaid sing, a storm is coming. Now, one, as Brian correctly observed, both whales and dolphins make sounds that sound very similar to singing.
Yeah.
Not human singing, but there's definitely a musical quality.
Yeah.
And this is why they call it whale song.
Could also be like where Homer got the idea for the sirens.
Well, yes, it all very much all interrelates.
Yeah.
The other thing is, on a ship, especially an older sailing ship with the rigging and the sails, when the winds are starting to pick up, the wind blowing through the rigging and the sails can sound very musical. When does the wind pick up? Right before a storm. Yeah. So by somebody digging a little further and going, wait, this explanation doesn't make any sense, they found a much better explanation.
There you go.
The point being, yes, Occam's razor is a good tool. Don't depend on it. There's a reason that the way that it's worded is it's usually true, not always true. Another great example of where it doesn't apply so well, quantum mechanics does not fit into Occam's razor at all. That has a lot of ideas that are not the simplest explanation, but the evidence all says it's true.
Yeah, that's where the math, gets really weird and can run counterintuitive to what makes the most sense. Doesn't always turn out to be.
My advice when dealing with the paranormal claim is go out and investigate. Go out and look. Unless there's a very good reason to believe otherwise, it's probably better off to go check it out. And here's the thing. You may be dealing with someone who's mentally ill. You may be dealing with someone who's watched The Exorcist one too many times and now thinks their house is haunted. But you're dealing... The critical thing, I think, to understand about this kind of investigation is you're dealing with somebody in crisis. Telling them they're crazy isn't going to make the crisis better. Going out there, talking to them, looking into it, and looking into it doesn't mean you'll ultimately say the house is haunted. You may just politely explain what's actually going on to them in as respectful a manner as you can. But you give the person some attention. You show that somebody has some basic human compassion, and you leave the person better than you started with. And that, in my opinion, is worthwhile and is a large part of why I do this. Even sometimes when I think I had a case recently that I didn't think there was anything to it. I was wrong. But I still went because this was a person in great distress who needed somebody to show some human decency. Mm-hmm. And I wouldn't have, if I had been right, if there hadn't been anything paranormal, I wouldn't consider the visit wasted. Just because it gives somebody that reassurance. And there's here's another thing. One of the biggest times that this becomes an issue is with demonic possession. I've been asked by skeptics before, how do you know the difference between demonic possession and mental illness? And the answer, from my perspective, there are people that will tell you all mental illness is in fact demonic possession, or most mental illness is demonic possession. They're wrong. I'm sorry, they're factually wrong, and what they're saying is actively dangerous. Yeah. But you can tell it's not real. It's usually not real hard to tell the difference. One, here's the first question you want to look at if you think something might be demonic possession or it might be mental illness. Is it responding to medication? If it's responding to medication, it's not demonic. If it's not responding to medication, it still might not be demonic.
No, it might just be a different...
they may have the wrong meds. They might not have the wrong dosage. There are also just some cases of mental illness, even well-known ones that usually respond to treatment, that occasionally don't respond to treatment. Or we don't have the drugs yet for the person's specific dosage.
There are some that are psychosomatic that, physical drugs just aren't going to get it.
That's why the standard question I ask whenever I'm talking to a new client is, have you been diagnosed with any mental illnesses? What medications are you currently taking? And then I go and because they sometimes lie or omit things about their mental illness, I'll go and research the medications they give me and find out, well, what are these usually prescribed for? What are common side effects? Yeah. And again, just because medication doesn't work doesn't prove it's demonic. The next question is something going on that can't be explained by scientific means? If you have a 12-year-old child who's been homeschooled all her life or has gone to a public school who suddenly speaks fluent Aramaic without any education in the subject, something strange is going on. or ancient Hebrew, or the little old guy who can suddenly lift a farming tractor by himself, or objects flying around the room without anybody touching them. Another real common one is Lou used to say, if you wanted to see a psychic, if you want to really see someone who could tell you the future, find somebody who's possessed. They will know things about you they have no business knowing. One of the common tricks Father Joe the Exorcist I worked with before he passed away would do is he'd show up in paint splattered overalls to a house and introduce himself as Joe. And if somebody looked at him and went, Father Joseph Brose, and all of a sudden, despite never being referred to as a priest, acting like a regular guy, knows he's a priest, something is probably going on, unless there's possibilities to that. But especially because he kept a very low public profile. He wasn't on TV all the time or anything like that. He wasn't a big, well-known name.
Right.
So if you're in Philadelphia, inner city Philly, where his congregation was, people might recognize him. If you're in California, if you're in upstate New York, probably not.
Yeah.
But they'll also know, if you're cheating around your wife, they'll know it. They'll tell you about it. And I do not suggest trying this at home, because this can be dangerous. But if you wait till the person's out of the room, if you put a cross somewhere, like behind their pillow, for example, and again, do not try this at home. This is what's called provocation. It's an absurdly dangerous idea if it is in fact demonic. When the person comes back, they won't lay on the bed, and two, they'll know exactly where the cross is, and that it's a cross. Even if the person who put it there is out of the room and hasn't had contact between the two. There are things like this that you can use to tell. And inevitably, the thing is, demons want to hide themselves because they don't want to be exorcised. But demons are creatures of pride and arrogance. Inevitably, if there's really a demon there, it's going to reveal itself in a way you can't mistake. If a 200-pound refrigerator flies across the room, something's going on. It's not, mental illness does not make objects fly on their own accord. You can get into an argument about psychokinesis, but then you're still dealing with something that is outside the realms of understood mental illness and modern science. One of the
few really good quotes from that movie, From Dusk Till Dawn. Psychos do not explode in sunlight. I don't care how freaking crazy they are.
Oh, a good comment from chat.
It was about vampires, but it fits in this case.
So we have a good comment from chat. You definitely see people throw down theories such as the backfire effect to confirm about how people won't change their mind despite evidence. But they usually use it as a kind of out for themselves to participating in exchanges where people have alternative opinions. And he's absolutely right. A lot of the time, people will reject evidence that doesn't fit their worldview.
Yeah.
And
That's
this is very true of believers and well known of believers. It's also true of skeptics and atheists. There's been I'll have to look it up and bring for another time because I don't have the book with me. I don't remember. But there are neurological studies that show that when argument or evidence directly challenges an atheist's worldview, and the same parts of the brain fire when you challenge the worldview of a theist.
Yeah, well, it makes sense because a person's worldview a lot of times is tied very closely to their identity. It's tied to things that make up sort of the core of their personality. Yeah. And humans are generally kind of resistant to changing themselves on that fundamental level.
Another good example of this we've talked about before is when George Lemaitre published the cosmic egg theory, which would eventually become known as Big Bang. Even Einstein admitted the math was solid, but it was not well received by atheists and agnostics or pantheistic deists like Einstein because it didn't fit with their worldview that the universe the Aristotle worldview of an unchanging universe.
Right.
If there's an unchanging universe, there's no God. If there's no God, if the universe never changes, there's no creation. If there's no creation, there's no God. And they even accused Lemaitre of being biased by his religious beliefs when ultimately the sciences borne it out. He was right. The atheists were being biased by their own beliefs. The evidence led elsewhere, and Lemaitre was doing the better job of it. There's plenty of we go into lots of examples of Christians doing the same thing. So by no means am I saying that theists are better at this than anybody else. I'm saying the point is everybody's about the same.
Yeah. No, and people and society especially is reluctant to change. People don't want to change their firmly held beliefs.
Which is a great segue into the second part of the show. And before we get there, I want to give out the number in case anybody wants to call in. 609-807-2492, 609-807-2492.
I'm helping.
So I want to get into, before we finish up, and I was going to do a demonstration. Unfortunately, it didn't quite work out. I'll be doing it in a future show. But alternative medicine, and particularly what makes one segue into the other, is the idea of peer review. Now, good scientific studies go through what they call a peer review process. This is where journals like The Lancet and Nature come into play. In a peer review process, you submit it to a group of other scientists in related fields, who then basically their job is to figure out what you did wrong, and to try to shoot it down. They're going
or replicate the results,
or not so much with the peer review, but other people are going to try to replicate your results, which is important as well.
Yeah.
But the first thing a peer review is going to do is, do your numbers check out? Is your own internal biases? It's to get a third opinion. Now, peer review process is by no means perfect. There's plenty of flaws that have been shown in the process, but it's an initial part of science's self-correcting nature. Mm-hmm. And one of the reasons science is so important is science doesn't take anything. As an atheist, I watch from time to time, Cosmic Skeptic puts it, there are no sacred cows in science. Everything is up to debate. Mm-hmm. You just need the evidence. And that's kind of the point of peer review, is to question things. Okay, this theory fits what we want to believe, but is it true? Yeah. Where this all becomes particularly important is a number of these. So when I say let me be clear by alternative medicine before I get into it. There are basically three types of things you can refer to as alternative medicine. There are treatments that actually work that aren't widely known about. A popular example of this would be a lot of herbal remedies. You know, there's science to... Not every herbal remedy people believe in is 100% backed up by science, but there's a lot of herbal remedies that are scientifically sound. They're not as well known, and a lot of the times what you run into is there's probably a synthetic version that arguably might be safer, might have less side effects, or might at least be strong. The other thing is it'll probably be stronger if you have a more controlled dose. But the original still works. It's just, well, we refined it down, and instead of you're eating a plant, the roots of a plant that have a dose between this and this, you're getting exactly this dose, which should have this effect, that should have this side effect. Right. But the point being, the herbal remedy does actually work. You're not dealing with nonsense. You're dealing with something legitimate. And science has recognized this for hundreds of years at least. The next thing along the line is there are treatments that are considered alternative medicine that work for some things that get credit for things they can't do. A really great primary example of this is chiropractic. Now, don't get me wrong. I am not denouncing the entire practice of chiropractors. There are a lot of legitimate uses for it, dealing with, particularly with back pain and things of that nature. On the other hand, there's this idea in chiropractic of subluxations, that these subluxations in your back are the root of disease. They can make you diabetic, they can make you ill, they can do all these other things. And that's not supported by science, and B, a back massage is not going to cure your diabetes.
No, I wish it would.
Yeah.
There's similar to that, I guess, would be maybe things like acupuncture and acupressure, where they do have effects on certain types of things, but they don't cure everything.
Acupuncture and pressure is another great example. They are provably what's called an analgesic. They are not an anesthetic. So anesthetic is something that completely deadens pain. You know, Novocaine, it actually chemically works to deaden the pain in your gums. It actually is based, by the way, on cocaine. If you didn't know that, that's why it has the cane suffix.
But it's not widely used as much.
Yeah. Acupuncture can't do that. It will not eliminate pain. On the other hand, it's very good for pain management. For decreasing pain, which is why it's considered now analgesic. And again, it won't. Despite the claims of some acupuncture practitioners, and there's others, there are honest ones that don't make these claims. It's not going to cure your disease. It doesn't. There's no evidence to say that it can do this.
Yeah. It's believed that it can, change energy flow in the body, especially in the East. It's widely believed, but again, it works for some people. It doesn't work for others. There's not a lot of hard evidence to back
Well, what
up
it comes down, what
the
this in the
energy
third
flow
category, which is the one that I really cannot. I hate. I mean, I have patients with a lot of Reiki. Like we had Chuck on the show. He practices Reiki. I have some patients with him. He's not making these completely extraordinary claims, and he's not telling people not to go to doctors.
Yeah.
But the third category, there are things that simply put don't work. And worst of all, some of them are actively dangerous.
This is what falls under the realm of quackery.
Yes, homeopathic remedies are a great example of something that doesn't work. And we'll get back to that in a minute. Another great example of something that not only doesn't work but is actively dangerous is laetrile, also known as amygdalin, also known as vitamin B17. So there is a chemical you find in apricots called amygdalin. There's a synthetic version of it known as laetrile. These are both erroneously called vitamin B17. I say erroneously because they are not, chemically speaking, vitamins. So that's the first problem. Basically, it was labeled vitamin B17 by the man who created laetrile, the synthetic version, as a marketing ploy.
Yeah.
You will find people that will say eating apricot seeds or taking laetrile or taking amygdalin, because you can take it in pill form as well, will cure cancer. In particular, there's a gentleman by the name of Dr. Kent Hovind, who is a prominent creationist, who sells this stuff on his website. There is no reliable medical evidence that laetrile can cure cancer. And worse still, when your body breaks these chemicals down, it produces cyanide. If you look, if you don't believe me, because I'm always in favor of do your own research, don't take my word for it. Google side effects of a amygdalin overdose, and then Google symptoms of cyanide poisoning. They're the same.
Yeah.
They are actively telling people to take a poison to cure cancer. Now, you can say that, well, and there's some truth to it, that chemotherapy involves poison as well.
Yeah.
And that's true. The difference being chemotherapy is not always the cure-all people think it is. But with the right type of cancer, in the right time, it does actually work.
Right. And it's been researched and tested at least.
There are alternatives. This isn't to say there aren't alternatives. Yeah. There is at least some evidence coming out that marijuana can help with cancer. And certainly, and I'm skeptical of the marijuana can cure cancer thing. We do know, it's pretty well established that it has a positive effect on the side effects of chemotherapy. So
it's also very good for depression and anxiety.
Anxiety. It's like, for the record, I am entirely in favor of the legalization of marijuana. I don't smoke it. I do not want to smoke it, but I believe in everyone else's right to make that. I made that choice. I believe in your right to make that choice.
Yeah.
I consider myself generally conservative, but a large part of my conservatism is I believe in small government, and I don't think outlawing pot is a good example of small government.
No, it's like the worst example.
It's like, no, you keep the government.
That's the government making money on a war on drugs that really only targets minorities,
and it's provably failed.
Yeah, it really has, and much of what's anti-marijuana is pretty traceable back to racist policies.
Once again, Adam Ruins Everything did an excellent episode on this.
Yes.
So one of the things you run into a lot, and if you're researching an alternative medicine, there's a bunch of great websites out there you can use to get accurate information. I would recommend both Quackwatch and Science-Based Medicine. Quackwatch is written specifically by a doctor who's retired from active medical practice and dedicated his time to fighting this kind of thing. Science-Based Medicine, I believe, has a number of contributors. Actually, for that matter, Quackwatch does too, which is overseen by a specific doctor.
Quack, quack.
And one thing you'll hear a lot about is what's called the double-blind experiment, which in medicine is basically the gold standard. So with homeopathy, for example, to do a double-blind experiment, and they have, you take, say, 10 patients. You take 5 doses of a homeopathic remedy and 5 doses of a sugar pill.
Yeah.
Of course, I repeat myself, but I'll get back to that in a second. Now, you mix them up. You have a computer randomize them so that neither the person administering the remedy, nor the person taking the remedy knows which one they got. Now, if consistently, if the ones that are showing relief of symptoms are always the 5 that got the actual drug, not the 5 that didn't, then you probably have something there. And then you do it again, and you do it again, and you do it again. But the key thing is this idea of double blind, where neither the person performing the experiment nor the person that's the subject of the experiment knows. Because that way you eliminate bias on the part of the experimenter and bias on the part of the patient.
Yeah.
Because another really, very real fascinating phenomenon that comes into play here is what's known as placebo effect. Mm-hmm. Now, placebo is good for, placebo is, of course, the sugar pill. It's something that has no proven, no medical benefit whatsoever that seems to have a medical benefit. Homeopathy is a placebo. And that will work for certain things. It actually helps, very helpful with pain management. And other symptoms, and the reason why is pain is a very subjective experience. How severe your pain is very independent, very personal.
Yeah.
So something that's purely psychological, like a placebo, can affect it. On the other hand, no placebo in the history of placebos is going to shrink a tumor. That's an objective thing that doesn't depend on psychology. Placebos will affect things that have a psychological component. They don't magically shrink tumors. They don't kill viruses. They don't do things of that nature.
Your tumor doesn't care what you think about it.
Now, you'll notice I'm picking on homeopathy in particular. So for those of you who don't know, because this is a common mistake, my producer was very kind to try to get a homeopathic sleep aid that was going to demonstrate this on air by chugging it. Unfortunately, she wound up with an actual herbal remedy. And remember what I said, herbal remedies actually do work. Yeah. The difference is that a homeopathic remedy, to be a proper homeopathic remedy, is subject to what they call the law of infinitesimals. There's an utterly, a scientifically ridiculous belief that the less the dose of what you're getting, the stronger the effect. So what they do is they dilute the substance in water and dilute it again and dilute it again and dilute it again until, chemically speaking, all you have left is water. Basically, for the concentration of substance to the amount of water you need, about enough water to fill the solar system.
Yeah.
Before you'd even know you have enough of the substance to register that it was there. The premise is that water has a memory. That whatever has been in water in the past, water somehow through some completely unobserved, unknown means has a memory, retains a memory of it that is beneficial. The last concept, which is where it gets dangerous, is there's also this idea that basically if you use a substance that causes a symptom, it can fight the symptom. So if somebody's got a fever and you want to get rid of their fever, give them something that causes a high temperature, but just dilute it way, 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 way down. This gets dangerous because it makes people think of vaccinations.
Yeah.
But again, vaccinations work. And yes, vaccinations work. That's going to probably be the last topic because we're getting near the end. Yeah. But
I'm just wondering where these theories came from, because honestly, any drug user can tell you that the smaller the amount does not
weaker
equal.
the effect.
Otherwise, you'd have people out there snorting like 1 gram of cocaine and going, "Oh my God, this is the best high ever."
It's basically a bit of pseudoscience from the 16th or 17th century.
Yeah, it's like, and it's still around.
Here's the kicker. Let's throw out all the science that says it doesn't work and take the idea on face value. So if water retains the memory of what it's been in contact with, think real hard about the water on this planet.
Yeah, and everything that touches
the fish poop
alone.
That water has been in contact with, the human feces, the urine, the poisons and heavy chemicals.
Dead bodies. How many dead bodies get dumped into bodies of water?
Sure.
Probably long, expired dinosaur pee.
Yeah, long expired dinosaur pee.
There we go.
Also, when Gene leaves, we are going to be staying on until Lacey gets back.
Okay, cool. Thanks, Gene. So we have more time to pontificate. So if homeopathy is true, you're also ingesting dinosaur pee. What's the effect of dinosaur pee on the human body? And yeah, it's a very, very minute trace amount in memory, but supposedly the smaller the dose, the stronger the effect. And here's the more obvious problem, to me at least. If the law of infinitesimals is true, that the smaller the dose, the stronger the effect, am I not currently, right now, as we speak, taking the greatest homeopathic remedy of all, which is nothing? Because what can be less of a dose than no dose at all?
Exactly.
I should be immortal because I don't take any homeopathic remedy. I don't even take that many medicines when I can help it.
We're all actually being kept alive by super infinitesimally small doses of kryptonite.
There we go.
An item that is so infinitesimal as to be fictional. That's the ultimate, thing. It's awesome.
Which all goes back to you want to apply critical thinking and logic. You don't want to make assumptions. So, because we skipped over, and we have extra time, I want to hit on vaccination.
Oh yeah.
Because
this makes me angry.
Yeah, a lot of this, it's like, if you want to take homeopathic remedies, especially as long as you go consult the doctor when you have something seriously wrong with you, I think you're a little foolish for wasting your money, but I don't care.
Yeah. Well, when you're taking your medical advice from Rob Schneider and Jessica, McCarthy.
Jenny McCarthy.
Jenny McCarthy. Sorry, yeah, Jenny McCarthy.
And Jim Carrey too.
Well, apparently Jim Carrey, I think has changed his.
Good.
Yeah,
he's not as much of an idiot.
He was influenced by her when they were together.
Yeah.
But I think he's since realized that she's a bucket of crazy.
Oh, she's more than a bucket.
Yeah.
If the homeopathic theory is right, she is
the
ultimate crazy that's keeping the rest of the world crazy.
She blamed her son's autism on vaccination,
But
and then it
claims
turned out
she cured it.
Well, no, because it turned out her son wasn't autistic.
Well, no, she claims he was. She claims she cured the autism.
Yeah, no, it turned out
Which is equally bullshit.
He had something else entirely different. He had some kind of like a brain tumor or something that caused symptoms. They treated it, they got rid of it, and hey, he recovered.
But she doesn't accept.
But no, she still believes against all reason.
Here's the thing.
Yeah, it's like, come on.
You can look up right now if you want to know what we're talking. If you want a better idea of this, look up Jenny McCarthy death toll. It is, or Jenny McCarthy body count.
Oh, goody.
From June 3rd, 2007 to July 18th, 2015, 152,763 people died of vaccine preventable deaths. Had wound up with illnesses that could have been prevented with the vaccines.
Okay.
9,028 people died in the same time period from things that vaccines could have treated. And the website, JennyMcCarthyBodyCount.com, will provide you with links and sources and things of that nature. People are dying because of this. We are seeing outbreaks of diseases that our parents and our grandparents would never even know about now. We would be telling stories of if we hadn't gotten on this nonsensical anti-vaccination kick.
Yeah. I mean, it's bad enough that certain cultures have religious prohibitions against things and, beliefs like that. But when otherwise reasonable people just suddenly decide, hey, some celebrity said this, I'm going to believe it over every goddamn doctor in the
And let's
world.
talk about where the origins of the anti-vaxxer movement.
Oh, yeah.
The idea that vaccines
One guy.
cause... Yeah, and it gets worse.
Yeah.
So the idea that vaccines cause autism was invented by a man by the name of Andrew Wakefield. People may think, you mean Dr. Andrew Wakefield. Not anymore. He lost his license for pushing this nonsense.
For a very good reason.
Yeah. And I'm glad he lost it. He deserved to lose it.
Yeah.
But he published a study. Now, to be fairness, we talked about peer review earlier. He published it in one of the most respected peer-reviewed journals in the world, which is the Lancet out of England.
Yeah.
They retracted it about a month later.
Right.
Here's why they here's what the true believers don't tell you. He was paid in excess of $500,000 by a consortium of lawyers looking to sue the vaccine manufacturers. They wanted evidence to use. They wanted his expert testimony in court. 2, his problem isn't with vaccines. His problem was with the main version of the measles, mumps, rubella vaccine that's still prominent. Specifically because a year before he published his bogus study, he patented his own safer vaccine.
Yeah, this is the other thing that it came up on where Adam Ruins Everything talked about science, and one of the issues that continues to come up is how science gets funded and how much of that is done from the private sector, who unfortunately all usually have their own agenda behind the science. They want the science to come out and support their conclusion. If not, they bury it.
But even then, there's the other problem. Okay, so questionable funding.
Yeah.
Personal self-interest. These are bad.
Bias, yeah.
Here's where it really gets bad. It violates medical ethics and makes it a useless study. It involved it only involved 12 children.
Yeah. Which is
several of the parents of whom
group.
have since come out to publicly denounce the study.
Mm-hmm.
2, his son was having a birthday party. He paid children without parental consent to give him blood samples to use in the study. That is a gross violation of medical ethics.
Well, yeah, and that's not a big enough sample size to prove anything.
Yeah. And yes, a handful of other small sample size studies like his have come out that say the same thing. Hundreds of studies all say that vaccines don't cause autism.
Yeah.
And here's the kicker. There's a study that was done relatively recently. You can Google this, of autism rates between vaccinated and unvaccinated populations. In the U.S. vaccinated population, the rate of autism is about 1 in 68 people. In the unvaccinated population, want to take a guess?
1 in 68?
Yep.
Yeah.
It's exactly the same. Also, not for nothing, while autism, people think autism's a new disease. It's not. It's a relatively new diagnosis. I mean, we've only come up with it in the last 100 years.
Yeah. No, but it's the symptoms are things that people have seen.
They called it something else.
They called them idiot savants. They or just idiots. I mean, there was mental retardation has been misdiagnosed for
one of the most
decades.
famous people to write about it. One of the first sources we have on the subject actually is Martin Luther, the founder of the Lutheran Church and Protestantism in general. His chronicler wrote about Martin Luther talking about a boy he had met that had no soul. Psychologists and psychiatrists who have studied the records all say, no, the kid just had autism.
Yeah. I mean, I can speak about this on a personal level.
Yeah.
I've found out within the last couple of years that I'm autistic. I didn't know this. I had symptoms that are now, kind of classic, but they were mostly as a child, and I found ways around them. I found ways to act more normal to fit in. I have 2 nephews, both of whom are autistic. One is severe, one is more moderate or mild.
Which is why they also call it a spectrum disorder.
It's a series of disorders. There's no one type of autism. There are hundreds of different disorders that fall into this vague definition. But, like I said, we've seen it, in members of my family. So I strongly have the belief that there is most likely a genetic component.
And the scientific evidence overwhelmingly is saying, yes, there's a genetic component to autism.
Yeah, you see it in families, like a lot of other traits.
And here's another thing, and here's one of the reasons I really find the anti-vaccine movement despicable. Brian, as he said, has been diagnosed with autism. How old are you, Brian?
43.
So he's lived 43 years with autism. Do you know the number of cases in all of human history that have survived, rabies without a vaccination? And rabies is unusual among diseases that you can vaccinate after the person gets infected and actually still successfully prevent the disease.
Yeah.
3 people in human history have ever survived getting rabies without treatment.
Yeah. I mean, smallpox used to be a
500
scourge of
million
humanity.
people died of smallpox just in the 20th century.
Yeah.
And that number stopped in 1980 because smallpox doesn't exist anymore thanks to worldwide vaccination.
Yeah.
There has not been a naturally confirmed case of smallpox anywhere on this planet since the 1970s. There are people that will tell you that there's this disease, monkeypox, and that this is just smallpox by another name. It's a related, and in fairness, it's a related disease. It's so closely related, in fact, that smallpox vaccination will prevent it.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing. Diseases evolve. Viruses mutate and change forms. They move from one species to another. This is
And in case
thing
in
that
point,
happens.
monkeypox is not nearly as fatal as smallpox was.
no. This is why the cold, you can't get rid of it because it keeps changing.
It's not one disease. It's not one virus. It's a host of viruses.
Right. And they keep changing and adapting. So
And that's also, by the way, this is why the flu vaccine doesn't work so well so many years. Is because there are thousands, if not millions, of strains of the flu, and what science is doing every year is going, okay, what's statistically most likely the ones that are going to be a problem, and creating a vaccine to cover that instead of covering everything.
it's meant to help keep it from getting worse and becoming a pandemic, like we had back in what was it,
1918 to 1920.
Yeah.
Keep in mind, people have this misconception about the flu, that the flu is this minor little illness that isn't a big deal.
Yeah, like it's a cold.
The flu kills people.
Yeah.
Don't take my word for it. Google Spanish flu epidemic. From 1918 to 1920, there was a worldwide epidemic of the flu that killed a lot of people, mostly among the very young and the elderly.
Before we had, modern medicine and vaccinations and stuff, the flu killed, probably millions of people.
And it still kills people every single year.
Yeah.
Rabies is another example, and not just in humans. Because I've also seen anti-vaxxers saying you shouldn't vaccinate your pets either.
Oh, yeah.
Which is so beyond stupid. So people in the United States, particularly in urban parts of the U.S., are not aware of how dangerous rabies is. I grew up in the country.
Apparently they haven't seen Cujo.
Yeah. We were warned often about how serious this thing could be. It's a nasty disease. If you start showing symptoms, and you don't show symptoms right away, you get bitten by an animal, the first symptoms don't show up for at least a month, sometimes even a year.
Jeez.
The moment you start symptoms, you're dead.
Yeah.
There is one known treatment for the onset of symptoms, which is basically they have to put you into a medically induced coma and overload you with antivirals and hope for the best.
Yeah.
That's how 3 people have survived.
Yeah, rabies is nasty.
Now-
I mean, you become afraid of water.
Well, actually, in point of fact, you get physical. It's a physiological response to water, not just fear.
Wow. So you literally can't hydrate yourself. You will dehydrate and die if you don't succumb to one of the other symptoms first.
Yeah, because it directly attacks the nervous system.
Yeah.
And here's the thing. Rabies is almost completely unknown within the United States. There's about 3 cases a year at most.
Yeah. More people are killed by cows.
Notice, though, there are 3 cases where symptoms show up. There's about 4,000 possible infections a year. Why are there 4,000 infections? But at most, and actually most years, the number of people who die from rabies is 0. Because if you get bitten by a wild animal in the United States, and the primary source of infection in the U.S. is wild animals, that's important. I'm going to get to it in a minute.
Yes.
But you go to a hospital, the wound is properly cleaned, and you are given a series of 4 shots. One is of, I forget what the one is, but then 3 shots of the vaccine.
Right.
That kill the disease in your system.
Yes. Do not pet that squirrel, no matter how cute it looks.
Other parts of the world, particularly India and India has a particular problem because there's a bizarre belief, and you guys are going to laugh at this, I guarantee, when I explain this. So there's a belief in what they call pregnant puppy syndrome. And it's as silly as it sounds. It's believed in parts of India, in more rural parts. This is not mainstream belief in India. India's not that backwards of a country, despite what people think. But there's a belief in parts of India that if you're bitten by a stray dog, particularly a stray dog who is emotionally excited or in heat, you can become pregnant with puppies, even if you're a male. Now, this condition,
thus giving birth to the saying, he had puppies.
Yeah, This condition is marked by barking and acting crazy. You go to a witch doctor. The witch doctor will give you herbs to treat your pregnant puppy syndrome. The witch doctor will then tell you, "Don't go to the doctor. I've taken care of everything." Parents do this when their kid gets bitten by a puppy. In a month, when the kid starts showing flu-like symptoms and then it starts progressing to worse, they take the kid to the doctor, and the doctor has to tell them, "I'm sorry, your son has rabies. He has a month or so to live, and there's nothing we can do about it." Now, the reason I keep touching on animals, in the United States, the primary source of rabies infection is wild animals. Raccoons, bats, squirrels. In every other country in the world, the primary vector for rabies infection is stray dogs. And the reason for the difference is widespread vaccination of animals. We are already running pretty long, but one thing I want to say...
Other countries, a lot of those countries don't keep dogs as pets. So
Yeah, that's also
so
an
there's
issue.
a whole difference in culture.
Well, there's also a problem in India aside from the pregnant puppy absurdity that, at least in parts of India, it's illegal to kill a dog.
Yeah.
That definitely causes a problem. We are running a little long. The one last thing I want to get into real quick on the vaccine front is you'll see people post lists of scary ingredients in vaccines. You get told antifreeze is in vaccines. You get told mercury is in vaccines. You get told, fetuses are in vaccines. You get told...
Somebody said thallium at one point,
Valium. You get told...
which I was impressed by because I'm sort of like, that's something
pretty.
that's
That's pretty
something
old.
you need to get. Well, that's also something you need to get out of a lab.
Yeah.
Another common one you'll hear is... oh, dang it. What is it? It's one of the most common things people say that's in there that they... aluminum.
Oh.
So let me run down some of the most common ones. Oh, and cat skulls and things of that nature. First of all, on the front of mercury, yes, some flu vaccines, and only flu vaccines, because thanks to this fear, it's been taken out of everything else, and that's actually horrible. Thermacell, which is a form of mercury, is found in some flu vaccines. The thing is, there's a quote from Paracelsus, or I should say an abbreviation of a quote from Paracelsus, who's the father of toxicology. All things are poison save the dose. How much of a chemical you get matters in terms of how dangerous it is.
Exactly.
Particularly the type of... there's ethyl mercury and methyl mercury. One causes brain damage. The other one is flushed out of your system too quickly to cause a problem. Thermacell breaks down into the kind that flushes immediately out of your system. Just because something is part of a chemical compound doesn't make it dangerous. Case in point, sodium is one of the most reactive substances known to man. The moisture on your skin can cause pure sodium to catch fire. Chlorine is one of the more toxic substances known to man. It was used by the Nazis and by the Germans in the First World War as a chemical weapon. But if you get sodium with chlorine in the same chemical compound, what do you have? Salt.
Yep.
A basic component of life that we would die without.
But we all have to watch out for that dihydrogen monoxide.
Yeah,
I think that's my favorite one to just laugh about. It's like, here, I have an entire container of it. Watch me do this.
See,
It's
I prefer the sodium chloride one because everyone knows the water one nowadays.
Well, but it's a way of like showing
sorry,
people
everybody should know
you can
sodium-
make something sound scary.
True,
but
but
everybody should have known about sodium chloride since I don't know,
People-
basic chemistry
True.
in 7th grade.
but people are stupid.
Earliest.
People still think the world is flat. We've known that better for 2,000 years.
Flat earthers have believers around the world.
Yep. Let that sink in.
Around the globe, yes.
But so real quick on the other ones, no, vaccines do not contain antifreeze. Yes, they contain a chemical found in antifreeze, but that same chemical is also found in some foods, toothpaste, and a number of other perfectly safe products nobody's railing against. Components are not the same as final chemicals. Running same note. Okay, I'm wrapping up. Same note. People say that vaccines include formaldehyde. There we go.
oh yeah.
Yeah, they do. You also find formaldehyde in bananas.
Yeah.
Your body produces more. Your body naturally produces, without ever taking a vaccine, more formaldehyde than the entire course of vaccines you'll get. How much you take matters. And the last one I want to touch on real quick is half of the other ones, the Catskills and stuff, are completely fictional and made up. Yeah, they include aluminum. Aluminum is a heavy metal. It can cause brain problems. You know what else includes aluminum that I don't think you'll ever hear an anti-vaxxer talk about the dangers of? Breast milk.
Yeah.
This information is available online. Don't take my word for this. Do your own research, but rely on reliable scientific sources. ScienceBasedMedicine.com, quackwatch.org are great starting places. Do your homework. Think for yourselves. Study the importance of critical thinking. But we've already run over. I want to thank everybody for tuning in. Remember, audibletrial.com/paranormale, audibletrial.com/paranormale. If you want to get a free trial from Audible and help out the show, or you can support us on patreon.com/demonology, patreon.com/demonology. But that's going to wrap it up for tonight. I want to thank everybody for listening. This is your host, Kevin Mears. Good night and God bless.
Stay woke.